Hello everybody, welcome to another Virgin Radio Classic Artist, and we've got a special one for you today. I'm dead chuffed to welcome Paul and Andy from Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. How you doing, guys?
We're good, thank you very much.
No, absolute pleasure. I mean, we should start off by saying, you know, we're here to talk about, I'm going to reach down and grab it here. This is incredible, 40 by 40, which is not only, 40 singles, but in 40 years, it's one of those kind of proper coffee table. If you can have coffee table box sets, I think we can.
Yeah, I think we can.
If we've just coined the phrase, it's got books, it's got everything. It's got like unreleased songs, sessions from the BBC.
Yeah, I mean that's the lovely thing about it is the fact that I'm sorry, can finish.
I was going to say, and plus, I must say, packaged very, very nicely.
Indeed. I mean, it's so discreet that you have to have an orange version of it on screen because it
doesn't
be able to see it. Yeah, I mean, the 40 singles in 40 years are great, but it's really about the other content in there that I think our fans will love. You know, there's all the Top of the Pops performances. There's Crush the movie for the documentary you made making the Crush album.
Yeah.
There is
Dazzle Ships from Hammersmith Odeon 1983. Never been heard before. The whole live concert.
Yeah. Were you guys quite meticulous about cataloguing stuff as you were doing?
No, terrible really. But fortunately, Universal. Well, it was Virgin then EMI and then Universal.
Yeah.
Have kept everything in their archives, and I mean one of the most fun things about doing this project for me was I went down. There's a massive archive. EMI archive down by Heathrow Airport, and it's one of those amazing places where, you know, like you see in the movies, with the, you have to do this to get in there, you know, and it's all it's completely hermetically
sealed. And that's got presumably like loads of artists.
Fireproof.
Well, hopefully fireproof. Imagine that. I mean, the
one in
Universal,
New York.
My goodness.
Yeah, no. Well, this is fireproof, and but all the Beatles stuff is in there. Bowie's in there. You know.
Wow.
Rolling
Is it heavy
Stones
security there?
It's very heavy security. Yeah.
It was amazing because I kept getting these texts and photographs sent to me going, "Do you remember this? Do you remember a song called this?" And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, we need that. And no, we need that too. You know, the thing was we particularly in the early days, we used to work linear onto tape. We would write onto tape just weird things and then try and distill out of it melodies and vocals.
Right.
But sometimes if we couldn't get something to work, there would be something else on the multi-track that might be on the record, on the album. That would get mixed, but then the whole thing would go into storage and we'd never get it back. So it sort of went into
your scrapbook.
Yeah. So we found all these
ideas leading to the other idea.
All these great little ideas that didn't quite make it, but it's nice to show people how we worked on things. I mean, there are about 8 or 9 actually complete songs as well.
Yeah.
But I think people are going to love all the stuff in there. It's the deeper stuff that I think is.
It's always interesting to hear a songwriter's journey, especially to a massive song. You know what I mean? And it's something that you two have kind of been quite open about, and so it's always interesting to hear where those seeds were initially planted. And, But let's rewind back and go right back to kind of like the early 70s, kind of punk and kind of all of that kind of stuff is happening, and you guys were quite intent on being the antithesis of kind of heavy rock music, weren't you, at the time?
Totally, yeah.
So when synths first came along, I mean, can you remember the first time you saw a synth or heard a synth?
The first thing, I mean, I was aware that synths existed because, you know, like there's people like Keith Emerson used to use it.
And it was the sort of thing like, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong had a rocket. Yeah. We can't afford one of those either. Yeah. It was like synthesizers were just completely beyond our reach.
Yeah.
But hearing Kraftwerk on the radio, I think, hearing Radioactivity. Autobahn was the first thing I heard on the radio. The Autobahn single, and it was just this long, kind of. I mean, how long was it? It was like ridiculously long for a single. But
it's not often you hear music that just sounds like nothing you've ever heard before.
No, and it was really the first day.
Yeah,
first day of the rest of my life, really, and for Andy as well.
And presumably that was it. It's like, right, I've got to get me one of those.
Yeah, that's the future.
Well, that we wanted to emulate it, but we couldn't afford to. So we started out on our journey with my bass guitar that was the only one I could afford in the second-hand shop because it was left-handed, so I learned to play upside down.
Oh my goodness.
Paul didn't have anything other than his cannibalised auntie's radios, which he cobbled the circuit boards together to just make noises, and then we put them through fuzz boxes and echo machines that we borrowed. And it was the first 6-9 months were just really ambient because that's all we had. We were just making noises. And then we finally bought a cheap electric piano and a cheap organ. That's when we started to actually... He started to learn to play writing songs.
Yeah. But presumably those, like you say, pulling together those circuit boards and stuff, I mean, that must have been a brilliantly creative time because...
Yeah, well, I mean, electronics was my hobby as a kid, so... And I even went to college to study it and stuff. But so I loved building stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I tried to do that, it'd be an absolute shambles.
Yeah, and I used to go around, I had a lot of aunties at the time, and I used to go around to their houses and go through the cupboards finding old radios that didn't work and say, can I have this? Because I want to nick all the parts out of it, to make something
We couldn't even afford to go to a radio spare shop and buy transistors. He had to steal them out of radios.
Working class boys from Liverpool had no money.
And then... one thing that's like you mentioned there from your early sound was that whilst it's very synth led and you could clearly hear the influences of things like Kraftwerk and stuff, but the fact that you had that driving bass guitar almost going through like an overdrive kind of separated you and gave you your own unique kind of style, didn't it?
It was what we had, so that was all we could sound like. And I think we were saved and inspired by an interview we read with Brian Eno, who said, if you're young and have no money, you've probably got junk shop instruments, but you're the only band who's got that collection of particular junk shop instruments. That's your sound. Celebrate it. And we were like, Brian, thank you. You've cleared the way for us to do this.
So we became Junk Shop Kraftwerk.
What a great name for a band. Yeah. And what was the scene like back then? Presumably you weren't on your own in this kind of in this quest for.
Well, we thought we were because this was before the internet. So we had no idea what was going on around the country, really. And our first discovery, really, I think, was the normal that other people were listening to the same thing as us. Daniel Miller, we heard "Warm Leatherette" by Daniel Miller.
In Eric's Club.
In Eric's Club.
Wow.
I mean, you've got to remember, we started really in 75, 76 when we got inspired. In fact, we started this sort of symbiotic relationship that I would go to Liverpool and buy German import albums, but I only had a mono record player. Because Paul had studied electronics, he built himself a stereo. So I had the vinyl, he had the stereo. So that brought us together, and then we aspired to start making noises and music. And we started with junk stop stuff, but this was very early on. This was before punk. So we'd found our alternative before punk. But punk opened up the doors to provincial clubs who would allow local artists to come and play and do their own thing. And so by the autumn of 78, we had been to Eric's Club in Liverpool a lot, and we finally knocked on the door and said, could we do a gig on your Thursday night free for members audition night? Just me and Paul and kind of doing our electronic music. And we thought they'd say no. They said, yeah, what are you called? We went, well, we haven't got a name, we'll get back to you on that one.
And the name was just written on your wall, wasn't it?
Well, it was written on Andy's wall, We had a couple of hours to decide what we were going to be called. And so we rushed around to Andy's house, and he used to write potential song titles on his wall, as one does.
Famously, it could have been worse, because below Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark was Margaret Thatcher's.
So I want to talk to you about I want to talk to you about band names because so there was that one, and also Hitler's Underpants. Can we talk about that as well?
Yeah.
We've both been in Hitler's Underpants.
Yeah. How many people can say that?
You and Eva.
Very good. Yeah.
So
that was a crazy band that didn't last very long.
No, I mean
we didn't come up with that name. I hate to say that was another loony from the Wirral Peninsula.
So, what came first? Was it your first hit or was it Factory Records? How did that?
What was remarkable was the speed with which things transformed our lives. Yeah. We were daring to do one gig. That's why Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark didn't really matter. I mean, it's a ridiculous name. We're stuck with it now for 40 years, but it was for one gig. We were just going to dare to go on stage and not let our mates play guitar and drums all over our electro ideas. We were just going to do it our way. Mm-hmm. And we had a mate who had a tape recorder and a garage, and we said, can we do a backing track? And so we went and did this one gig, and amazingly, the people at Eric said, oh, we quite like what you did. You're on with a guy who's on Factory Records. They've got, or he's from Factory. Do you want to go and play at a club in Manchester called Factory? So we went, all right, well, we'll do 2 gigs. We went to Factory. That's where we met Tony Wilson.
Yeah.
And then
Cheekily handed him a cassette.
Gave him a cassette and said, can we get on Granada Reports because he was a local newsreader in Manchester. Yeah. He filed it in a shopping bag in his car with all the rest of the rejects, and it was only a few weeks later when his wife got in the car, went, "What's this bag?" And he went, "The rejects." And she went, "Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, that sounds cool. What's that?" Put it on and went, "That's great, you should sign them." And he went, no, they played at the club. It's not my cup of tea. She said, "No, really, that's a hit." And so we went, "Okay, dear, I'll sign them for you." That's how you get a 40-year career.
Wow.
Thank you, Lindsay. We owe everything to Lindsay.
Fantastic.
His wife.
We were in the junk bag and she fished us out.
So, I mean, you went from the junk bag to being on one of the coolest labels in the world.
Yeah, and it was amazing to sort of do the factory tour.
Yeah.
You know, we were touring around Britain with Joy Division and Certain Ratio, and it was an amazing experience.
What a pioneering tour that must have been. And then,
it was incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, it was... the funny thing was, though, of course, is whenever you turned up at a place, the lads from Joy Division would go, "Do you want to be the headline act tonight?" And we go, "No." And they go, No, you can be. No, the fire breather's on, isn't he? We're not going on stage with all the paraffin. We are not being the headline act.
brilliant.
That's how
You'd be
nuts
falling over on the stage.
Yeah.
The factory gigs were kind of crazy.
They were bonkers.
But Tony, it's only recently, actually, I was talking to Peter Saville, who, of course, was the iconic sleeve designer for Factory, and he said, "You were actually the only band that fit our original premise, which was we were going to be a development label to develop artists and then pass them to majors, get the money back and plough it back into developing." He said, "You did exactly what we intended to do. You moved on. All the others stayed and we never got rid of them." You know?
That's the thing, they made it too comfy.
Yeah, they made it too comfy, exactly.
So were you ready for success? Did it feel like
terrifying? It was really terrifying. I mean, we had no aspirations to be a successful artists or pop stars or anything like that.
Was it?
So,
when you say things happened quite quickly. Was it one of those classic ones where you wake up the morning after being on top of the pops and you're trying to buy a pint of milk? Was it one of those kind of scenarios?
No, it wasn't like sudden stardom like that. Like, you can't go out the house, but it was just we invented the band to do a one-off gig on October the 12th, 78. Then we played. Then before Christmas, Tony offers us to do a record on Factory. It comes out in May 79. It lands on the desk of somebody who just happened to have been given a new record company by Richard Branson because as a thank you for signing Sting to Virgin Publishing. And she hears it and phones up and goes, "Have you got any more gigs?" I went, "No, we haven't actually, no Factory." So, "Can I come and hear you?" And so she came up and sat on the sofa in Paul's mum's back room where we used to write all the songs. We played our entire set of 7 songs.
Private gig for her. You know?
And she just went, "Oh, that's great." And she went away and we went, "Well, that'll be the last we see of her." 2 weeks later, we're playing in Blackpool with Joy Division. She's stuck in holiday traffic. It's a Friday night. She arrives as we're loading it. She goes, "I've missed you." "Oh, well, here, read this on the way home." So we throw everything in the van. I'm in the front. He's in the back holding the equipment together.
Take turns holding the gear.
And, flip the visor down, put the light on and go, "Right, what's this?" "Oh, it's a 7-album deal."
Wow.
Yeah.
And that
couldn't
was
believe it.
That was what, 7 months after we did our first gig that was supposed to be a one-off.
Which was insane, really.
Were you reading through the kind of the various kind of incarnations and kind of and whatnot of the band, it struck me that there's been a bit of push and pull towards kind of, I guess, commercial success and I guess artistic kind of creativity.
Yeah.
Has that been a constant kind of niggle?
It's not really a push and pull. I mean, there's 2 sides to the band. I mean, I remember when we switched over from being on Dindisc, which was owned by Virgin, over to the mothership, to Virgin Records, and someone said to us, "Don't quite understand you, this band. Are you Stockhausen or are you ABBA?" And we both said at the same time, "Can't we be both?"
Yeah,
because that's OMD really. I mean, there are certain songs that everything starts as an experiment with us. Even our hit singles will start as an experiment.
Yeah.
But we'll just keep honing them and put a tune on until people say, "Oh, that's a great tune. That should be a single." But all our songs start as experiments, and some we hone up into pop songs, and some we leave as big, abstract, interesting pieces.
it must have been quite fun you know, as with a lot of bands of that time, where you had these really amazingly uplifting kind of pop melodies, like Enola Gay, for instance. But actually, you know, you get everyone kind of like da da da, da, and then when they sit down and read the lyrics, they go, "Oh, hang on a sec, that's about the bombing of Hiroshima." That must be quite. It almost feels like you're sneaking it in there.
It wasn't intentionally surreptitious of us. I mean, literally, we would work things up, as Paul said, from audio experiments, and then hope we would distill a melody or a lyric out of it. Because we like experiments, but we don't like them for their own sake. They have to go somewhere musical.
Yeah.
Because it has to be worth listening to again. But yeah, Enola Gay was just... I mean, people did actually, in a critical way, say, how can you do that? How can you write such a jolly song about such an awful...
Such a dark subject.
And I mean, it just turned out that way. I think this is the whole thing about our entire career, certainly in the early days. There was no plan. There was no kind of like, oh, this is going to be the route to be the next big thing. I mean, being a two-piece with a tape recorder, playing songs that your mate thinks are in a punk club called Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark was not exactly a...
You're just asking for a kicking, weren't you?
It wasn't an obvious plan for world domination.
It wasn't a recipe for that. No.
So it's always been... We did it our way. I mean, this was the amazing... Yeah. They gave us a load of money, and normally you go into a studio and spend it all and you got a couple of reels of tape. We thought, nobody's going to buy this album, so let's build our own studio.
With the money for
when
the
we
advance.
get dropped, then we've got a studio.
Then we've got a business.
That's classic working class mentality, isn't it? It's
Well, it is.
buy, don't rent.
Yeah, budget for failure, you know.
Yeah,
And
budget
so,
for failure,
yeah.
so you've got something.
And the incredible thing is, they gave these three kids, us and our manager, £30,000 to go and build a studio and record an album, and that's why it sounds like garage punk, because it basically was.
Yeah.
In those days, 30 grand was a lot of money.
Nobody came to listen to it. Nobody A&R'd it. We delivered it, and the third single, which admittedly we did record because we realised it was a bit, was a hit. And then the next time we go back to our studio, we do our thing, and then we phone up and say, right, we're going into this studio, and the third album. We were left to our own devices. Nobody told us what to do.
Did you feel under more pressure as the hits? You know, once you know, did you find there's two ways of looking at it? You know, I've spoken to some musicians where they say hits breed hits. The second you work out the formula, it's quite easy to get a hit. Others kind of crumble and go, my God, I wrote this song, it was a huge hit, and then I was just like sat there.
The only time I think we started to become conscious of this and worried about our sort of commerciality was after the failure of Dazzle Ships. I mean, for us it's a successful musical album, but commercially it was a disaster. And all the albums leading up to that, you know, we just kept having, you know, hit after hit, messages, and Enola Gay, Souvenir, Joan of Arc. Yeah, and it was a bump in the road, and we never felt the real pressure up until after Dazzle Ships. And then we suddenly were in this position where, you know, we just bought houses.
You were married.
I was married. You know, we had a lot of people on the payroll, crew and stuff, and all of a sudden everything was on us to kind of keep this business going, and we just had a commercial flop. Yeah. And it was at that point we started to feel pressure.
Right.
But leading up to that, the first three albums, we felt no pressure. We were just, it was our artistic statement. We just kept doing whatever the heck we felt like doing. And
selling millions.
And selling millions, yeah.
And America was really responsive to you guys?
Not initially.
Later, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the early albums didn't do very
really?
well.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were signed to, we were signed. Virgin didn't have Virgin all over the world, so they had to license. And what they did was they just put three bands in a bag and go, here you are, would you like this? And so we got licensed to Epic in America, I think with Japan and XTC. It was like a grab bag. Here you go.
Yeah, it's like a
Japan, XTC, and OMD. Cool. And Epic had Michael Jackson. They didn't give a damn about some weird English stuff. So for the first 6 years, we couldn't get arrested in America. Wow. We were just underground.
We were just this weird band with a weird name from England, you know. They had to kind of contractually put our records out, but they didn't invest.
We finally made it in America, but the funny thing is most of our biggest hits in America weren't that big in Europe. It's like we got two different set lists.
So that's the dream, isn't it? It's kind of like
Well, it is a bit.
the dream. It means everyone's a winner.
No, it's bloody confusing.
But it's confusing. We have to do a different show in America than the show we do in Europe.
Wow.
But the strange thing is that when people, if Americans are like visiting London, they go, "Oh, OMD are on." They come and see our show, and they go, "Where's all the hits?"
Where's the hits? Yeah, wow.
So,
I mean, one band. I mean, I think am I right in thinking were you due to support Depeche Mode at the Pasadena Bowl?
We did.
We did. Yeah.
You did.
We did the 101 tour.
That was their 101. That was the one that
We did the whole tour.
We did the whole tour. Yeah.
That
with
must.
them.
I mean, because that must have been a perfect kind of marriage of kind of support act and main act there, because Depeche Mode really kind of trailblazed that kind of moody electro.
Oh, they really did.
Stadium synth.
And on that tour, you know, if you leave was a hit in America, so you know we were flying as well then.
It was strange for us because Vince Clarke has told us on a number of occasions that they heard our first single, Electricity, in a club in Basildon and went, "We're going to do that." And when he learnt to play Almost, he thought, right, I can play synth now as well as Paul Humphreys. And then 10 years later, the band that we had inspired with our first single are selling out arenas and stadiums, and we're their support band. And we didn't get into it for the money, but the problem was that we were losing a fortune doing that tour, and they were earning loads.
Enough to retire.
So by the time we'd done that tour, all the millions of records that we'd sold, we owed Virgin £1 million.
Oh my God!
And not because we were living in castles and buying
Buying
yachts.
yachts,
It was just we'd been taking tour support and video costs and blah, blah, blah. And it was just the royalty percentage we were on was so bad.
Ouch.
So we were paying back at such a bad rate that we were getting the advances before we paid off the last advance. If you know.
Right.
So it was a
like a payday loan.
strange
It's like
it was a
payday
strange
loan,
thing.
yeah.
So at the end of the 80s, sadly, we were under a lot of pressure due to money, not because we wanted more money, but you can't run a band when you've got none.
No.
So
We had to do a best of album to save ourselves financially. Really.
Yeah. And I
We
mean,
sold millions, but
just talking about back to the music, you mentioned kind of like songs like Joan of Arc and whatnot. How does your process work when you're writing songs? You say you experiment, but surely there's times where, say, you lead one or you lead another. I'm guessing that the slightly more, I guess, the poppy top lines come from you, Andy. And no, is
not
it?
necessarily.
Oh, okay.
No, they come from various places.
It's just from looking at the live videos. You know, Andy likes to strut his stuff and kind of get stuck in. I think.
No, I mean,
Paul's a little bit more demure than me, and as he likes to tell people, I've spent 40 years overcompensating for his static performance. So.
No, but in terms of writing, you know, what we like to do is we like to start with something, an abstract idea, a sound, maybe a lyric, crazy title of a song or something like that, or just some sound. We found sound. We've heard some music concrete or something like that, and we need something, and one of us will just shove it in the room, and then we'll just bat it around until we've made something out of it.
Give me an idea of how we make things, right? Souvenir. If you think of Souvenir, you will remember the beautiful, beautiful melody. Yeah. That started out with Paul helping a friend copy some tape loops of a choir warming up. Yeah. So Souvenir started with these tape loops, and then the melody and the vocal was distilled out of it. Wow. Same with Joan of Arc. I just laid down 5 minutes of me singing just going, ah, through an echo, and then just randomly doing A major, playing on a glockenspiel. Then that was the bed track. Then I went, now I've got a feeling, I'm going to try and make a song out of it. So it always starts from the bottom up.
Right.
It never starts with the tune down.
Right. Oh, okay. That's
quite often the melody is the very last thing we put on
right.
Because we'll have done this track, and at the very end, that's when you can kind of distill out the melody out of all the harmonics of the things you've done, and you can get the kind of ultimate melody for the song.
Has your writing process changed over the years now that technology has made life easier in terms of if you need to get to a sound, it's just there. You can.
But the thing is, we call it the tyranny of choice, because when we first started out, we had an organ, a piano, a little synth, a bass guitar, drum box.
That
was it.
Winston was the tape machine.
Winston the
but
tape machine.
We also had a little drum box, and that was it. We had to make songs out of that. Now,
Bass.
yeah.
Chord. Melody. That was it.
That was it. Yeah.
Job done, million seller. Thank you very much.
But now we've got all of these plugins and all these digital synths. It's endless what you can do.
Yeah. My bass drum library has got 457 bass drums. Which one do you want?
Yeah.
So we go through
The one that we always have, please. Yeah.
And so you've got to kind of. You can get lost in your possibilities now,
Yeah.
and so you've got to kind of, in the same way as a sort of painter chooses his colours before he starts.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of do
The
that.
Lowry,
really, otherwise,
you've got to be a bit Lowry about
You've
it.
got to be Lowry about it. Yeah.
I mean, but in terms of the technology, I mean, the funny thing is, we were trying to be the future, but we were actually using a bunch of antique junk, really cheap second-hand stuff that was at least 15 years old, if not more.
Yeah.
And it was all hand played. We started before MIDI, before sequencers, before computer. It was all hand played, trying to sound like a machine, but that's why the timing is all over the shop. And then MIDI came along, and then drum machines, and then computers. And I mean, now, you've got a computer, you can call it all up. I mean, I like that. A lot of the younger artists who are into retro synths and analog synths, they go, "Oh, have you still got a Jupiter 8 and a Roland this and a Korg that?" We go,
Farfisa,
"Nah."
yeah.
They go, "Well, what do you use on the?" We've got the virtual plugins.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't believe you don't use
Sacrilege.
the originals.
Yeah.
And we're like,
Yeah.
those things never stay in tune. They
Yeah.
weigh a ton to carry around. You can't
nightmare.
synchronize.
There's a lot of rose-tinted specs in
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Give
I
me,
don't miss those at
give
all.
me the virtual version
Give me
every day.
Give me it on a USB stick, let me plug it in, brilliant. So we're at a stage where you've had your first bump in the road. It's getting a bit tense.
God, are we still in 1983?
How
long you got?
A lot of kind of parting of ways and coming back together and parting of ways, and then I guess one of my first introductions to you guys was I think probably sailing on the Seven Seas when
and that's when I'd gone.
and then you've gone. So take me through that kind of era. So Andy, you ended up being the kind of you were manning the ship.
Yeah, he was manning the OMD.
We just got exhausted and worn down by the whole thing. So by the end of the 80s, we were struggling. We had different people pulling us apart, different ideas pulling in different
There was
directions.
divisive elements around us, which didn't help.
No.
We got together. We'd been writing separately. We got together and we listened to the stuff. And briefly we went, okay, well, this sounds like two different bands. Well, you have one side and I'll have the other. And went, let's not be stupid. That's ridiculous. So we stopped.
Yeah.
And then various reasons, we won't go into them, I decided to carry on. It was terrifying because the only person I'd ever made music with since I was 16 was Paul.
Yeah.
So I felt really anxious, really nervous. The Sugar Tax album that came out in 91 doesn't even mention my name anywhere. I'm kind of like hiding behind the corporate logo of Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. And Sailing on the Seven Seas was released, and it was terrifying because it didn't chart well. And it just crawled up the chart.
I was DJing in a Derby nightclub through that period, and it was a grower, not a shower, and it became impossible to dance to in a nightclub, but it became just such a massive tune. That, I mean, must have been a bit of a relief to you.
Oh, well, it was, because, we'd had to go through all this legal thing about separating and the value of the name and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It was like a divorce, really.
Yeah. I mean, what was really funny was, I mean, we're too nice to really fall out.
Yeah.
It was a bit painful, but we didn't. I had to go round to Paul's house for some reason to talk to him about, I think the band was going to tour and I didn't have the sounds for some songs. And so I came round and he went, yeah, here you go. And as I was leaving, he went, oh, congratulations on Seven Seas getting to number 3. I'm glad it didn't get any higher because Souvenir got to number 3. So there was parity.
He gave it with one hand. What was that like for you, though, Paul?
I was very to begin
Don't
with,
lie.
It was really horribly weird to have OMD out there. This is, we created this baby ourselves, both of us, and for it to be out there without me being part of it was difficult and weird.
It was weird for him and weird for me, because
But I was happy that he had a hit, because it meant that he was keeping the
legacy
going.
Yeah.
Really.
So after that one, how did when did you first start winking at each other across the bar again?
Well, the thing was that when you got into the 90s, electronic music per se, apart from the sort of the dance side of things, which kept on going, electronic pop really was dead. It was consigned to the decade before, because grunge had taken over, and Britpop and all of that. So
what we hadn't realised was the 90s signalled the beginning of postmodernism in music, and because it became everywhere. But we didn't realise it. We didn't notice at the time. Hang on, we were trying to kill guitars. How come they're the future again? What happened to this?
Well, it's music cyclic, isn't it? And it's like
popular culture started to eat its own history.
Yeah,
but we didn't realise it. So I stopped in '96 because I felt I was banging my head against a brick wall. Although Paul had actually co-written something with me on the album that came out, the Universal album. So we were back friendly talking. And then for the next few years, people started to talk about electronic music, and synth pop was getting back in the charts. And we started
past
getting
the millennium. Yeah, phone started ringing, and wanting us to get back together and do things, maybe do a concert. But it was never quite the right time. Andy was doing his projects, I was doing mine, and it got to sort of 2005, and the phone was starting to ring a lot more by the time 2005, and he gets a call from a German TV station saying that
Germany started calling you.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Because of Germany, we got back together. Because
Germans have had a lot of influence on us.
Because The Maid of Orleans was the biggest song in 1982, and they were doing this TV show with the biggest hits over that decade or whatever it was, and they wanted us to perform it. And we, up to that point, we'd always said no to things that came up. But he phones me up and said, "Do you fancy a jolly to Cologne? Spend a week in a 5-star hotel, we'll have some fun, and we'll get a chance to see each other. We haven't seen each other for ages." And so we said, okay. And when we just had this weekend together, and we worked for 4 minutes on the Saturday and another 4 minutes on the Sunday.
Brilliant.
And we thought, this is fun, isn't it? Yeah. Should we just do this again?
So that was when it started up again.
Yeah. But that's the validation of what you'd done. Obviously, like we say, music's cyclic, and what goes around does generally come around, and you can't hold a good track down regardless. We were talking before the camera started rolling about bands like Nirvana and grunge, whereas you strip that back and the essence of a song is still a great song. And like you say, something like Enola Gay, it could be played, and I'm sure has been played many times. I was watching a video of yours where you're playing it with the full orchestra at last night at the Proms, and it just sounds glorious.
I would like to say, though, just being completely honest, I was getting a bit annoyed in the 2000s that we were kind of getting forgotten as a band. There was a few electronic bands that were getting forgotten. When people look back at all the big bands of the 80s, it was always, Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet. It was all those kind of culture club.
The poster bands.
Were the poster bands of and Wham, and everyone remembered them from the 80s. But we sold millions of records in the 80s, and no one was talking about us.
Yeah,
and
that
it was starting to annoy me, really. And so. But I wasn't sure if people would be interested. We weren't sure if people would be interested in us. So when we put some shows on sale, we only put 9 shows on sale in the UK, wondering if there was any interest. And those 9 shows turned into like 49 shows or something.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden we were back doing it again. But
and so what are you guys up to now? Obviously we've got 40 by 40 out.
I mean, the funny thing is that the band has now been back together in its second incarnation for longer than we were together the first time. So that is amazing. We started playing live again, and it was fun. But it was noticeable that the vast majority of the audience were people who'd been there the first time.
Yeah.
After 2 years, we kind of sat down and looked at ourselves and said, is this it now? Are we a tribute band to ourselves?
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, there is not. But the reason why Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark existed, our kind of raison d'etre, was to do something new, write new music, and challenge ourselves to be inspired to do something more interesting than, you know, "Ooh Baby, I Love You" and the same old chords.
Yeah.
So we thought, do we dare to actually try to make new music?
Yeah.
And it's scary because we hadn't done a lot together. We didn't know if people would be interested. And let's be honest, most bands of a certain age only do a new record because they want a new logo on the tour T-shirt.
Yeah.
And they spend about a week in a studio knocking out any old and calling it a new album, and it's a bad pastiche of their former selves.
Yeah.
We didn't want that. We were like, if we're going to do it, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
And actually, the last 3 albums we've done have contemporized us. What we notice now is our audience age demographic is much bigger. People respond to the new tracks and the old tracks, and it seems to have made us more relevant. And as you say, there's nothing wrong with celebrating your catalogue. And
we enjoy doing that. As well.
And you know, certainly, you know, if you know, we've all been to see bands and they go, "Oh, and now we're going to do a new track," and everybody goes, "Right, the bar then."
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen with us. I mean, we still play the hits,
Very good,
but
yeah.
the new material is solid.
Brilliant, and I can't
We're
wait.
proud of it.
I cannot wait to get stuck into this. And presumably it's out now. People can get it everywhere in all the usual all the usual places.
4th of October, and I mean, there's variations on it as well. There's the box that's got everything in it, but then you can just purchase other. There's the vinyl version. There's the CD version.
Brilliant.
But the box, it's just got so much stuff in it that you know, from all the hits right down to the stuff that never got released, the weird stuff. So it's been wonderful to do it, but you know what? That's just where we stand now. We're still going forward.
Yeah,
Perfect.
There's a lot of energy left in this band.
I can tell. I can
a lot
tell.
of life left in it.
I can tell. Musical Viagra. Andy
like
and Paul, thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for joining us on Virgin Radio Classic Artists.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.